Hello, I'm here with Melissa Edelman of the World Bank. Um, Melissa, thanks for joining. I'm really excited to talk to you about your work, and you've done a lot of work on school leadership and education more broadly in lower and middle income countries. But I want to ask you about one specific paper that you're writing with Juan Barón, titled "Managing Shocks in Education: Evidence from Hurricane Matthew in Haiti." So if you could start out by telling me what the research question was that you were trying to answer and how you went about doing it.
Sure. Thanks a lot for having me here today with you, Samir. So this work I've done jointly with Juan Barón and also my other colleague, Renata Lemos. In terms of the questions we were trying to answer, so we were doing this research in the broader context of work that was pulling together the latest evidence on education management across Latin America and the Caribbean, and trying to really push the boundaries of the quantitative evidence of the impact of management on student outcomes in particular. And so in Haiti, we wanted to study a particular dimension of school management, which is really about managing shocks, and specifically natural disasters. So in Haiti, unfortunately, it's a country that's exposed to really significant hurricanes. And then, of course, I think everybody remembers that there was an extremely serious earthquake there in 2010. And we came to this particular research a little bit by chance because we were already carrying out a survey of day-to-day management practices across schools in southern Haiti when Hurricane Matthew hit in 2016. And it had pretty significant impacts in the area where we were already working. And so we tried to quickly develop a plan to answer a few key questions. And a couple of those questions were first, whether schools that are kind of better managed on a regular basis are better able to cope with a disaster like a hurricane or not. And second, how schools react after disasters in terms of learning from their experience and adjusting their practices in the face of that experience. And to answer those questions, what we used was the DWMS, which is an instrument that I'm sure listeners are familiar with. And we also developed a new instrument, a disaster preparedness and mitigation survey, to try and measure school level management practices that are generally considered to be important to be well prepared for a natural disaster. And we did that in collaboration with some of our colleagues who work on kind of risk management issues and sort of based on the global literature on this. And then we also collected information on things like the impacts of the hurricane on schools, like infrastructure damage and school days missed and things like that.
Great. Seems very relevant for the time that we're in now with COVID.
Yeah.
Can you talk through the results from that paper, what you guys found?
Sure. So a couple of the key results are one that you know uh, for the same level of impacts experienced from the hurricane, schools that are regularly better managed, so, as indicated by the DWMS score, those schools were able to recover more quickly after the hurricane. So, recovery as measured by things like how soon teachers and students return to school to actually start having classes again. And that also, what we found really interesting was that schools that were regularly better managed also seemed to learn more from their experience with the hurricane and report having adopted better management practices for disasters, 6 to 9 months or so after the hurricane is over. So they seem to kind of learn more and adopt more than schools that are not as well managed beforehand and that had the same sort of level of damage from the hurricane.
And were you able to find or understand how that might have impacted the students of those schools?
Yeah, so we, have limited data on students themselves, but we do have, information on how many school days were missed and kind of the share of students who came back. And then also some learning indicators from an EGRA that was done.
Mm-hmm.
So based on those things, those kids missed less school overall, and more of them came back more quickly. And then also, they did better on the EGRA, not surprisingly in a sense.
Yeah.
In the schools that are better managed and recover more quickly.
And did you find were those impacts kind of meaningful? Like, was this like these like big shifts in kids coming back, or was this kind of around the edges?
Yeah, not huge. So I'd have to double check the actual magnitude of the impacts,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
I think they were significant enough that we think it does matter. So let me just see if I can pull that up really quickly because I don't want to give you the wrong number. Let's see. Actually, maybe something I'll say while I look for this, Samir, that I think is also important is, a country like Haiti, on average, management practices are not stellar. So, if you look at the distribution of DWMS scores compared to other countries, certainly, the ones in Haiti skew to the left. Um, but even there, you do see some schools that have good practices that may still be informal. But even there, when you have kind of um, a compressed distribution that's skewed to the left, like you still see that it actually does matter, and that there are schools that are doing better than others, and that difference does matter, which we thought was also very interesting to note that even in a really capacity constrained low income context, that this can still really matter. Um, okay. Okay, so here I can just tell you, maybe for example, that at a certain level of damage from the hurricane, which in this example is, let's say, for schools that report that about 20% of the school infrastructure was damaged from the hurricane, that a one standard deviation better score on the DWMS, so the regular management practices, is correlated with an increase in the share of students who are back within 2 months of 5 percentage points. So 5 percentage points more students are back within 2 months after the hurricane.
I see. Um, Thanks for looking that up.
Sure.
When you so global school leaders, we train school leaders, and so for organizations like ours that focus on working with school leaders and kind of supporting their capacity building, what do you think the implications are of this paper? And particularly, I don't know if you think it has relevance for kind of today and COVID and everything that education systems are going through, but
Yeah.
maybe you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, this is focused specifically on natural disasters, and kind of that's, those are the specific practices that we measured. But I do think that this work kind of highlights one of the many channels through which school management really matters for how schools run, for the experience that students have. So I think it gives some evidence to the fact that school leaders are the ones who are helping schools kind of react on a day-to-day basis to all kinds of shocks that are happening. And the literature on this isn't huge, but there's a few pieces of evidence here and there around these types of things. And schools face financial shocks, natural shocks, all kinds of different types of things that happen. And part of being a good leader is obviously being able to react quickly and effectively to those types of things. And COVID, is obviously very different from a hurricane, but I think some of that underlying idea applies. And I know that there are people who are researching this now as well, sort of being able to adapt to change is an important aspect of leadership and management for sure.
And as you think of the field of school leadership, particularly in low and middle income countries, um, and kind of, what a future research agenda can look like or should look like for the field, what do you think are kind of the key questions that we should be trying to understand?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of really interesting lines of research that still, have yet to be fully explored. And you and I have talked about some of these before. I mean, I think uh, one of them is certainly around all the efforts that go into strengthening school leadership. And obviously, your organization it was one that's really focused on doing this and doing it well. I think we're just starting to learn about what are the elements that really make for effective programs to strengthen school leadership. I think we're a bit behind compared to, for example, the work on teacher training that's already been done sort of in recent years. And I think that there's a lot to learn from that could be applied to training school directors, I think both sort of pre-service and in-service. And that would be really interesting to kind of unpack that more, because I think we're still at a stage where management is a pretty multidimensional, complex idea, and so we have there are a lot of different interventions going on that are called management sort of interventions, but could look very different, sort of one from the other. And I think in order to actually really learn from all of the research that's going on, I think the more systematic we can be about unpacking what those interventions are, I think the more we can learn from them. So I think that's really kind of a key line of research. To really get into. Another one I think is, sort of above the school level, sort of the immediate ecosystem that schools sit in. Um, this is an area I think that's even less well researched, like in terms of local administrative districts and sort of all the people who run schools at a local level or work with schools at a local level. So really getting into that, and obviously that looks different across different countries, but I think that we need to understand better who those people are, what skills they have, or how we could help them do their jobs better, and help them sort of be more aligned with good school management across all the schools that they work with. So those are just two areas, but I think that there's probably many more. I mean, maybe I'll just mention one more if you'll let me. I also think there's the aspect of supporting sort of managers who are already there or about to be there, sort of with training. I think there's also a really interesting set of questions around selecting managers and who makes for a good manager. So there's some work around this, like looking at high performing education systems and how they select their school leaders and their system leaders. But I think that there's a whole agenda around that in low and middle income countries, where I think a lot of the sort of factors that go into that look quite different from high income countries. And so I think that would be really interesting to look more into around selection of school leaders as well.
Great. That is an ambitious agenda, but I'm hoping that we can all make some contributions towards that. So thanks, Melissa, for joining and for sharing your work with us.
Thank you.
All right.